Welcome to Talk Treatises.
It's great to be here.
Today, we're not just opening a book. It feels more like we're diffusing a bomb. Or maybe watching one explode in slow motion.
I think that's a fair analogy. This isn't a gentle text.
No, we are doing a deep dive into one of the most blistering, controversial, and I think it's fair to say intellectually aggressive works in the entire history of Western thought.
Aggressive might be putting it mildly. This text is a declaration of war. It's not an argument. It's a philosophical battering ram.
We are talking, of course, about The Antichrist by Friedrich Nietzsche. And, before we even crack the spine on this one, we really need to set the tone.
Right.
This is not a theology sermon. We aren't here to preach, and we're not even really here to offer a standard atheist critique either.
No, this goes way beyond that. We're here to unpack a text that explicitly, and I mean explicitly, declares war on the dominant moral framework of the last 2 millennia.
And to really get it, to understand this work, you have to understand the atmosphere in which it was born. The context is everything here.
It is. This was written in late 1888. And that date is critical. This is just a few months, mere months, before Nietzsche's total mental collapse in Turin.
So he's on the edge.
He's right on the precipice. He is writing in a period of what he himself called almost hysterical creative activity. He felt he was running out of time.
You can feel that urgency on the page. He had just finished The Twilight of the Idols in the case of Wagner, right?
He was just firing on all cylinders, burning the candle at both ends and in the middle. There's this sense that he had to get all of it out, everything he'd been building towards his entire life, before the lights went out.
And what's so fascinating is that The Antichrist, this explosive book, wasn't even meant to be a standalone work, was it?
Not at all. It was originally intended as just the first volume of a massive 4-volume magnum opus.
The famous unfinished work.
The one and only, The Will to Power. And this book, The Antichrist, was supposed to be the first part, subtitled, An Attempt at a Transvaluation of All Values.
That phrase, transvaluation of all values. Let's just pause on that for a second, because it is the key to the entire project, isn't it? It sounds like such a mouthful.
It is, but it's his mission statement. Think of valuation as the process by which we decide what is good and what is bad. What we value.
Kindness, honesty, humility.
All of it. Transvaluation means to completely flip that board over. He believes that for the last 2,000 years, Western civilization has been valuing the wrong things.
Oh, not just getting the answers wrong, but asking the wrong questions.
Worse, he thinks we've been calling the things that are actually bad for us good and things that are good for us bad. It's a total inversion.
And this text is the first strike in that war.
It's what's called a philippic. A fiery, bitter condemnation that acts as the keystone to his entire later philosophy. He isn't just trying to critique Christianity, he is literally attempting to break the history of mankind in two. He wants to create a before and an after, with him as the dividing line.
Which brings us to the audience. Who is he even talking to? Because when you read the preface, it feels incredibly exclusive. He says he's not writing for the man of today.
No, definitely not. He says he is writing for Hyperboreans.
Hyperboreans, that's a deep cut from Greek mythology.
It is a very deliberate one. The Hyperboreans were this mythical people who lived beyond the north wind, beyond the ice, beyond death itself. They were, in a way, untouched by the sickness and decay of the normal world.
So he's looking for readers who are already outside the system.
Exactly. He uses this to define his ideal reader. He says, to even begin to understand this text, you have to possess an intellectual integrity to the verge of hardness. You have to be indifferent to politics, to nationalism, to profit, to all the little games that modern people play.
So, okay, let's establish the ground rules for us and for you listening. To get what this text is trying to do, we have to be willing to temporarily set aside our modern virtues.
You have to.
We have to be willing to look down, just for the sake of the analysis, on things we usually consider good, like democracy or peace or helping our neighbor, and be willing to ask forbidden questions.
Yes, you have to have, as he puts it, new ears for new music. If you try to read this with a standard modern moral compass, it's just going to sound like cruelty or madness or just incoherent rage.
But if you read it inside his framework,
it's a terrifyingly consistent logical structure. He's asking us to climb to the top of a very high, very cold mountain and look down at the whole of human history from a completely different perspective.
All right, then. Let's climb that mountain. The main analysis has to start where he starts, with definitions that just completely flip the script on morality. This is part one, the core definitions of good, bad, and happiness.
Right. He starts with the most fundamental question of all. What is good? Now, if I walked out onto the street and asked a random person that, what do you think they'd say?
Oh, probably something about altruism, kindness, selflessness.
Yeah.
Helping the old lady across the street, donating to charity.
The golden rule. Helping your neighbor. And Nietzsche's text screams, wrong. The answer it gives is visceral. It's almost biological. What is good? Everything that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man.
Okay, wait. So it's not just the feeling of power, but power itself.
Both. The feeling of its increase and the raw possession and exercise of it. They are intertwined. Good is growth, expansion, overcoming.
So good equals power. Then what is bad?
Everything that stems from weakness. And notice the phrasing there. He doesn't say evil. He rarely uses that word. He says bad.
What's the distinction for him?
Evil implies a kind of metaphysical darkness, a moral choice to be malevolent. Bad, for him, is just a description of a state of being. It's an inability to be strong. It's decay, retreat, failure. It's a physiological fact, not a moral stain.
And that leads to the third definition. What is happiness? If it's not contentment or peace.
It's the opposite of contentment. What is happiness? The feeling that power is increasing, that resistance is being overcome.
So it's not a state, it's a process.
It's a vector. It's a movement upwards. Happiness is not sitting in a comfortable chair. It's the feeling you get when you're climbing the mountain, when the muscles are burning, but you're still gaining altitude. It's the friction.
This is the complete inversion of morality we were talking about.
Yeah.
He's saying that the things we typically value, peace, security, equality, comfort, are actually signs of decline because they lack that friction, that overcoming.
He is launching a direct assault on the very idea of progress. I mean, we live with this baked-in assumption that humanity is always evolving, always moving toward a better or higher level.
Of course. We look at our technology, our medicine, our democracies, and we think we're superior to people from the past.
And Nietzsche argues that this is a profoundly false and dangerous idea. He says, and this was shocking at the time, that the European of today, meaning the late 19th century, is strictly inferior to the European of the Renaissance.
Inferior in what way? Because we've become softer.
Because we've been tamed, we've been domesticated. He argues that evolution doesn't guarantee elevation. You can evolve into something weaker, something more herd-like.
You can evolve into a barnyard animal rather than a wolf.
That is the exact metaphor. And he believes that is precisely what modern progress is. It's the process of domesticating the human animal, of breeding out the dangerous, powerful, noble instincts in favor of safe, predictable, useful ones.
Which leads us directly into, I think, one of the most contentious and misunderstood parts of the book, the problem of pity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for most of us, pity is a cornerstone of virtue. It's the basis of charity, of empathy, of compassion. Nietzsche calls it a vice, a dangerous vice. Why?
He calls it a depressant. And this is, again, a physiological argument. It's not just a moral one. He believes that when you feel pity for someone, you literally lose strength. Pity drains your vital energy.
It's a tax on your own power.
A huge tax. And on top of that, he makes a mathematical argument that it actually multiplies suffering in the world.
Okay, you have to break down that math for me. That sounds counterintuitive.
It's simple, brutal arithmetic. If a friend of yours suffers, that is 1 unit of suffering in the world. If you then pity them and suffer with them, which is the literal meaning of compassion, to suffer with, now 2 people are suffering.
You've doubled the misery.
You have doubled the total amount of misery in the world without actually solving the original problem. You haven't taken their suffering away. You've just created a new suffering in yourself. You've spread the infection.
But I mean, isn't that what empathy is? Isn't that what connects us?
For him, that connection is a weakness. It's a contagion. But it goes deeper than just feeling bad. He argues that pity actively thwarts the process of evolution.
How so?
Well, this is where the text gets very Darwinian, even though he had his own critiques of Darwin. He argues that pity works directly against the law of natural selection, or as he would see it, the law of life. By pitying the weak, the sick, the botched, and the suffering, you actively preserve what is ripe for destruction.
Oof, ripe for destruction. That's an incredibly hard phrase.
It's one of the harshest in all of philosophy. But in his view, nature or life intends for failures to fail. It intends for the weak to be weeded out so that the species as a whole can get stronger, can reach for a higher type.
And pity gets in the way of that.
It puts a stop to it. It defends the weak against the strong. It defends the botched and the failures. And by doing so, it gives life itself a gloomy and questionable aspect. You fill the world with failure instead of with triumphant examples of strength.
Yeah, he connects this directly to Schopenhauer and the concept of nihilism, doesn't he?
He does. Nihilism being basically the denial of life, the belief that life is meaningless or not worth living.
Right.
Now, Schopenhauer, who was Nietzsche's great educator early in his life, thought that since life is fundamentally suffering, pity was a good thing. It was the great virtue because it helped us share that unbearable burden and recognize the futility of it all.
And Nietzsche just flips that on its head.
Completely. He says, yes, Schopenhauer is right. Pity is the practice of nihilism, and that's precisely why it is so bad. It denies life. It persuades men to embrace nothingness. It makes them long for the beyond, for heaven, for nirvana, which Nietzsche argues is just a fancy poetic word for death or non-existence.
He brings up Aristotle here, too, as a contrast. Aristotle saw tragedy as a kind of purgative for pity, catharsis.
A brilliant point. For Aristotle, you'd go to the theater, you'd watch a terrible tragedy, you'd feel all this pity and fear, and it would get flushed out of your system. It was like a psychological cleanse.
So Aristotle saw pity as a toxin you need to get rid of to be healthy.
Exactly. Nietzsche sees Christian pity not as something to be purged, but as a pathological accumulation of that toxin. It's not a temporary fever, it's a chronic disease. He doesn't want catharsis, he wants surgery. He wants to lance the boil and remove pity from the human soul so that we can look at suffering without flinching and maybe even see it as necessary.
And this brings us to the people who he thinks are peddling this toxin, part 3 of our analysis, the theologian instinct. And importantly, he's not just talking about priests and collars here.
No, and this is absolutely crucial to understanding the book. The true enemy in this text is not just the priest, but anyone with theological blood in their veins.
Which includes?
It includes idealist philosophers, especially the great German philosophers who came before him. He sees them as priests in disguise, selling a secular version of the beyond. They've just swapped out God for the good or the true or reason.
And the accusation he levels at them all is pretty devastating. He basically says they have an allergy to reality.
That's a great way to put it. He says that for the theologian, any theologian, what is strictly and factually true must be felt as false. And conversely, what is damaging to life, what is a lie, is called true. It's a total inversion of reality itself.
He has a very specific definition of a lie, doesn't he? It's not just saying something that isn't true.
No, it's more profound than that. For him, the worst kind of lie is refusing to see what one sees, refusing to see things as they are. It's a willed blindness, a preference for a comforting fiction over an uncomfortable fact.
And this is where he really goes after Immanuel Kant. I mean, for most people, Kant is the absolute pinnacle of Enlightenment ethics, the guy who gave us the categorical imperative.
A giant of philosophy. And Nietzsche just treats Kant's massive success as nothing more than a theological success. He sees Kant as a clever, backdoor theologian.
How does he justify that?
He attacks the categorical imperative itself, this idea of doing your duty simply for duty's sake without any personal inclination.
Right, the idea that an act is only truly moral if you do it because it's the rule, not because you want to.
Exactly. And Nietzsche finds this horrifying. He argues that a virtue that does not spring from a personal instinctual necessity from your own will to power is actively dangerous.
Why dangerous?
Because it separates you from your own life, from your instincts. If you are doing something just because an abstract rule tells you to, you become a kind of robot for a phantom duty. It's a recipe for decadence because it drains the action of all personal power and joy. It makes virtue a chore, not an overflowing of strength.
So it really does seem like instinct is the hero of this story for him, and abstract reason or theology is the great villain.
In many ways, yes. He wants to return to a morality that is grounded in the body, in our deepest instincts.
Yeah.
But he does make a really interesting distinction between different kinds of theology or religion.
Which leads us nicely into part 4, Buddhism versus Christianity.
Right. He classifies both of them as religions of decadence, as nihilistic religions, because they both ultimately turn away from this world, but he distinguishes them very, very sharply.
And he actually has a surprising amount of respect for Buddhism.
A great deal, relatively speaking. He calls Buddhism 100 times more realistic than Christianity. He says it fights the real problem, which is suffering. Buddhism, in his reading, is beyond good and evil because it doesn't get bogged down in moral judgments about sin and guilt. It's more like hygiene. It's a set of practices designed to reduce pain. If you have a headache, Buddhism tries to cure the headache. It's practical.
Whereas Christianity doesn't fight suffering, it fights sin.
Exactly. And sin, according to this text, is a fiction. It's an invented problem. Suffering is a real physiological fact. Sin is a theological interpretation that's been superimposed onto suffering to make people feel guilty about it.
He gets into the physiology of these religions, as he calls it, where they come from.
Yes, he tries to diagnose them like a doctor. He says Buddhism arises in a very old, very tired, highly civilized culture. The people are over-refined and their nervous systems are so sensitive that they feel pain excessively. So what does Buddhism prescribe?
Cheerfulness, quiet, and absence of desire.
A kind of spiritual diet. It's a chill pill for a burned-out civilization. It's a gentle, peaceful path to nothingness.
In Christianity.
He argues Christianity arises from a completely different environment, from barbarians, from strong but crude and bungled men. These aren't tired people. These are people with huge amounts of repressed aggression and tension.
So they need a different kind of medicine.
They don't need a chill pill. They need an outlet. They require cruelty, tragedy, grand drama. They need the concept of the devil and hell to satisfy their inner tension. They need a narrative of profound guilt and redemption to control their otherwise violent and chaotic impulses.
So, to put it crudely, Buddhism is a religion for the end of a civilization.
And Christianity is for a civilization that hasn't even properly started yet. A civilization that's still trying to tame its own inner beasts of prey.
And how does he say it? Does that taming? What's the mechanism of that guilt? This is part 5, where he dives into the history of Israel and the birth of the priest. It's a fascinating and provocative historical reconstruction.
It's like a detective story. He's trying to perform a genealogy of the idea of God. He traces the history of the ancient Israelites. He says, originally, their God, Yahweh, was a perfectly natural, national God.
What does he mean by natural?
A God of power, a God of war, a God of rain, a God of the harvest. A God that reflected the tribe's own will to power. When the people were strong, their God was strong. When they won battles, it was because Yahweh was powerful. This is a healthy, natural religion for him.
But then, history happens. The kingdom is divided, they are conquered, they are sent into exile.
Exactly. The nation falls into ruin. The state is destroyed. Now, logically, from that natural perspective, if your God is a God of power and you lose all your power, what should you do?
You should probably abandon that God. He failed the test.
You should find a stronger God. But the priests, he says, did something extraordinarily clever, something that changed the world. They didn't abandon the God. They altered the concept of the God.
This is the great shift.
This is the moment of transvaluation. Instead of misfortune being just bad luck or the result of a military defeat, the priests reinterpreted it as punishment. They invented the concept of sin.
So it's no longer we are losing because the Assyrians have better chariots.
It's now we are losing because we have disobeyed Yahweh. This is our fault.
That is a massive psychological pivot. It internalizes the defeat. It makes the victim entirely responsible for their own victimization.
And in that moment, it creates what he calls the moral world order. It's a colossal lie where the priest suddenly becomes the most important person in the world because he's the only one who knows what God's will is. He becomes the interpreter of suffering.
The priest determines the value of all things.
He becomes a parasite who makes himself indispensable by poisoning natural life with the concept of guilt. Think about it. If you're happy, healthy, and successful, you don't really need a priest. But if you are sinful and constantly being punished, you desperately need him to mediate between you and this angry moral God.
So the priest actually needs sin to exist. He needs you to feel bad to stay in business.
Precisely. The text says the priest lives upon sins. He has a vested professional interest in making sure you never feel completely innocent or at ease with your own nature.
Okay, so now we get to what is, for many people, the most surprising part of the book. We've been talking about this relentless attack on Christianity, but then, in part 6, the text makes a sharp turn and separates the figure of Jesus from the religion of Christianity.
Yes, this distinction is absolutely crucial. And it's where he delivers one of his most famous lines. He says, "In truth, there was only one Christian, and he died on the cross."
That is such a heavy, damning line. So if he wasn't the founder of Christianity, in Nietzsche's eyes, who was Jesus?
He profiles Jesus not as the Son of God, not as a Messiah, but as a very specific psychological type. He calls him a political idiot, an anarchist, a free spirit.
What does he mean by that?
He argues that Jesus cared nothing for the established order. Not for dogmas, not for rights, not for Jewish law or history or the temple structure. He was a radical outsider.
And he talks about the importance of the inner light.
Right. For Nietzsche, Jesus didn't bring a faith, meaning a set of doctrines you have to believe. He brought a practice, a way of living, a state of being.
And what was that practice?
To resist nothing, to feel no anger, to make no distinctions between people, to accept everyone and everything. It was a life lived entirely in the here and now of the heart, a state of blissful peace that was immune to the outside world.
He makes a reference to Dostoevsky's novel The Idiot, right?
He does. It's a key reference. He suggests Jesus was a psychological type like Prince Mishkin in that book, perhaps hypersensitive, almost pathologically incapable of understanding concepts like resistance or enmity or guilt. For this type of person, reality is only a series of symbols for an inner truth.
So the kingdom of God that Jesus spoke of
Was not a place you go when you die. It wasn't a future event. It was a state of the heart that you can enter right now, at any moment, by simply ceasing to resist. It is within you.
Okay, so if Jesus was this peaceful, inner light anarchist, where did the church come from? Where did Christianity as we know it come from? And this is where the villain of the piece enters, part 7, the disangelist.
Paul, the Apostle Paul. For Nietzsche, Paul is the absolute antithesis of Jesus. If Jesus represents a passive, gentle withdrawal into the inner heart, Paul represents the genius for hatred and the raw will to power of the vengeful priest.
The text calls what Paul did the great forgery.
A forgery of genius, but a forgery nonetheless. Nietzsche argues that Paul needed power. He saw this small community of Jesus' followers and saw an opportunity to organize a mass movement, an empire. But the actual teachings of Jesus, be peaceful, don't judge, turn inward, are terrible for building an empire.
They're not exactly a call to action.
Not at all. So Paul, the genius, reinvented the story. He shifted the focus entirely. He emphasized the death of Jesus, the sacrifice on the cross, over the life of Jesus, the practice. He turned a way of living into a doctrine of belief.
And he's the one who invented the concept of the resurrection.
According to the text, yes. Paul invented the story of the resurrection for a very specific strategic purpose: to destroy the center of gravity of this life and shift it entirely to the beyond.
What do you mean by that?
If the ultimate reward or punishment is in the next life, then you can control people completely in this life. You can tell them their suffering here doesn't matter, that it's actually a sign of their holiness. This life becomes merely a miserable waiting room for the next. It devalues reality.
And this connects to what he calls the lie of equality.
This is the core of the political critique. Paul, he argues, spread the doctrine of the immortality of the individual soul. This idea that every single person, from the emperor to the lowest slave, has a soul that is immortal and of equal value in the eyes of God.
Which sounds pretty good to modern ears.
To modern democratic ears, it sounds wonderful. To Nietzsche, it's the most dangerous poison ever concocted. He calls it a flattering lie designed to appeal to the vanity of the masses, the Chandala, a term he borrows from the Hindu caste system for the outcasts.
Why is it so dangerous to him?
Because it destroys what he calls the pathos of distance.
Pathos of distance. Break that down.
It's the feeling of separation between ranks, the inherent understanding that some people are naturally superior, stronger, more intelligent, more noble, more creative. It's the basis of all aristocratic values.
And the idea of equal souls erases that.
It completely demolishes it. It allows the weak, the resentful, the botched to claim that they're actually the equals of their masters. And not just equals, but that they are the good ones and the strong are evil. It's a revolt of the creepers against everything lofty, noble, and high.
So Christianity for him is fundamentally a slave revolt in morality.
The ultimate slave revolt, a vampire revolt. Which brings us to part 8, the destruction of culture. And this is where Nietzsche looks back at history, specifically at the Roman Empire, and he weeps.
He has a deep admiration for Rome.
He adores Rome. He calls the Roman Empire the most magnificent form of organization ever achieved. It was built for eternity. It was scientific, administrative, tolerant in its own way. It affirmed this life. It was grand.
And he says Christianity didn't conquer it on the battlefield.
Yeah. That's the insidious part. It didn't meet Rome in open combat. It sucked it dry from within. It was a secret subterranean poison. It replaced masculine Roman reality with holy lies. It shifted the focus from building aqueducts and writing laws to saving souls and fearing hell. It drained the vitality, the will, the very lifeblood of the empire.
He also has a very provocative take on Islam and the Crusades, which is probably surprising to a lot of people.
Very provocative. The text actually praises the culture of the Moors in Spain. He describes the world of Islam at that time as masculine and life-affirming, largely because it didn't have the same hatred for the body and for sensuality that he saw in Christianity.
It was a noble culture, in his view.
Yes, and he reframes the Crusades completely. He says they weren't a holy war, they were higher piracy. He sees it as the crude, barbarian German nobility going down to loot a civilization that was, in every meaningful respect, science, art, hygiene, vastly superior to their own.
And then comes the final knife twist, aimed directly at his own people, the Germans, the Renaissance, and Martin Luther.
This, for Nietzsche, is the great tragedy of modern history, the ultimate missed opportunity. He sees the Renaissance as the moment when Europe almost woke up from its 2,000-year slumber.
It was the transvaluation of Christian values actually happening.
In real time, you have popes in Rome, like the Borgias, who were behaving like powerful, secular, pagan princes. They were embracing art, beauty, knowledge, power, even murder and incest. They were becoming Roman again.
They were putting noble, this worldly values back on the papal throne.
Exactly. Christianity was about to be defeated by its own corruption, which was actually a revival of life and strength. It was about to transform into something higher. And then along comes Martin Luther.
The disaster of a German monk with vengeful instincts?
That's the one. Luther goes to Rome. He doesn't see the rebirth of beauty or the return of power. He's a resentful priest. He only sees corruption. He gets moralistic. He goes back to Germany and starts the Reformation.
And in doing so, he restores the church.
He saves it. He gives it a new, more serious, more German lease on life. He saves Christianity at the very moment it was about to choke on its own success and become something noble.
So Nietzsche essentially blames the Germans for saving Christianity and ruining the Renaissance. That's quite an accusation.
He never, ever forgives them for it. For him, it's the reason Europe is still sick.
Before we move on to our thought experiments, let's just briefly touch on a couple of other key comparisons he makes to drive his points home. He brings up the Code of Manu.
The Code of Manu, an ancient Hindu legal text. He holds it up as an example of an Aryan aristocratic morality, the polar opposite of the Bible.
Why does he admire it so much?
Because it organizes society based on what he sees as nature. It establishes castes, it affirms life, it affirms hierarchy, it affirms marriage and the importance of women and family for the continuation of the race. He contrasts this directly with the Bible, which, in his reading, organizes society based on the lie of equal rights, which he calls a poison, and fundamentally despises the body, sexuality, and this world.
And finally, his defense of the scientific spirit. This seems a bit contradictory for someone who praises instinct so much.
It does, but it makes sense in his framework. He argues that the priest, with his need for faith, is the mortal enemy of science, which requires doubt and evidence. He reinterprets the story of the Garden of Eden as God's fundamental fear of science.
Thou shalt not know.
Exactly. God expels man from the garden the moment he eats from the tree of knowledge. Why? Because God fears a rival. He doesn't want humanity to figure things out for itself. So Christianity, as the heir to this tradition, creates spiritual distress, sin, guilt, fear, essentially, to distract humanity from thinking, to prevent us from looking at the world with a clear, scientific, honest eye.
It is. It's a lot to take in. I mean, it is just a relentless, hammering, 150-page attack.
It is absolutely intended to be. It's an attempt to use language like a hammer to clear the rubble of 2,000 years of Western civilization so that something new, something stronger can be built in its place.
Okay, let's take a breath. We have walked through the fire of the text itself. Now let's try to apply some of these radical ideas. It is time for our thought experiments.
And our usual disclaimer, these are purely hypothetical scenarios. They are designed to test the author's framework in extreme situations. They are for educational exploration and entertainment, absolutely not policy proposals.
Of course. Experiment number 1. I'm calling this the No Pity Bioethics Committee.
Ooh, okay. I'm listening.
Imagine a modern healthcare system, a whole society really, but it's structured entirely on the text's definition of good, that which enhances the species and the will to power, and bad, that which stems from weakness.
So in this hypothetical hospital, pity is outlawed. A doctor showing titty would be like a doctor today not washing their hands. It's medical malpractice.
Exactly. If a doctor extends the life of someone who is deemed incurable or suffering from a degenerative weakness, they are punished for multiplying misery and hindering evolution.
Okay, so resources, money, research talent are stripped from palliative care, from treating the chronically ill, and funneled exclusively to the strong to make them even stronger. Gene editing to enhance athletes, cognitive enhancers for geniuses.
And the very definition of health shifts. It's no longer the absence of pain or absence of disease. The new definition of health is the capacity for great exertion and overcoming.
Wow. Okay, so here's the philosophical inquiry. Would this society actually produce a Superman, as the text seems to hope? Would you get this upward curve of human evolution, or would the whole thing just collapse instantly?
That's the question. Nietzsche's text assumes that removing pity automatically makes the species stronger. But does the kind of strength he admires, the creativity, the daring, actually require a foundation of the herd safety that he despises?
That's a great point. If you're a tightrope walker, you perform more daring feats if you know there's a safety net. If you remove the net, do the acrobats fly higher, or do they just stop performing because the risk of a single mistake is absolute annihilation?
It also raises the question of social cohesion. If I know that this society will discard me the second I get sick or old or stumble, do I have any loyalty to that society?
Right.
Or do I just become a paranoid, selfish atom constantly fighting everyone else?
Right. It tests whether empathy and pity are really the weaknesses he claims, or if they're actually the sophisticated evolutionary glue that allows for the complex cooperation that is, in itself, an incredible form of power.
A tough one. Okay, experiment number 2, the Borgia papacy timeline. This is the counterfactual history based on his great lament about Martin Luther.
Ah, the great what if. I love this one. So imagine Luther never existed, or he was ignored, stayed in his cell, and his writings went nowhere. The Renaissance papacy continues on its trajectory of secularization, art, and what Nietzsche would call pagan values.
The Catholic Church over the next few centuries evolves into a purely aesthetic and political institution. It still has the Vatican, the cardinals, the cathedrals, but it worships beauty and power instead of crucified God.
The Christian vocabulary remains, but the meaning is completely inverted. Salvation no longer means going to heaven. It means achieving artistic genius. God is not a personal deity. It's the creative force in a Michelangelo or a Da Vinci. Sin is not disobeying a commandment. It's being ugly or weak.
You have a pagan church wearing Christian robes. Now, the text implies this would have been the glorious death of Christianity as a life-denying force. The philosophical question is, what would have happened next?
Would this new Rome, a Rome that celebrated science and the body, have accelerated the scientific revolution by centuries? Would we have been on Mars by 1800?
Or would it have just created a different and maybe even more brutal kind of tyranny, a tyranny of the beautiful and the strong? Imagine a society where your social standing is determined entirely by your aesthetic value.
It's fascinating. A Europe united by a church that didn't believe in sin, but believed in grandeur. It might have avoided the bloody wars of religion that tore the continent apart, but on the other hand, it might have created a caste system so rigid and cruel that the Chandala revolt would have happened anyway.
But instead of being led by resentful priests, it might have been led by proto-communists centuries early.
It's a wild what if. It really tests his assumption that the Renaissance path was inherently the higher one.
So we've reached the end of this deep dive. We've unpacked the dynamite piece by piece.
And we are left with the text's final, unambiguous verdict: Christianity as the one great curse, the one immortal blemish of mankind.
It is a heavy, uncompromising verdict, and it leaves you, the listener, with the challenge that was thrown down in the preface. Do you have the new ears for this terrible, beautiful, dangerous music? Or, after all this, does it just sound like noise?
Or, maybe the most unsettling question of all, does it sound like the truth, but a truth you are terrified to touch?
That is the question. Thanks for listening to Talk Treatises.
Until next time.